and folks will trickle in as we go. So welcome everyone to the Caregiver Respite for Caregivers of Persons with Disabilities Bidders Conference. Today we're going to be talking about the request for proposal, the procurement process, and have space for question and answer. Before we get started, a couple things that I want folks to know. The Zoom platform. So thank you to Darlene, who's here today providing captioning for us. If you are interested in having closed captioning available, there should be a closed captioning option available to you, and you can turn it on and it will show up at the bottom of your screen. Here's a little bit of detail about the webinar platform that we'll be using today. You have listening privileges only. Currently, I have you all on ability to talk so that we can see one another, and we'll be doing introductions shortly. And then a couple other details that are here that I'm not going to read through. Information about how to use the webinar functions. If you would like to ask questions during the presentation, that's fine. I'll track them and we will make sure to circle back to them at the question and answer portion of the bidders conference at the end. And before we get started, we want to do a land acknowledgement. So I currently sit on the land of the Duwamish and Coastal Salish people. Folks are probably sitting in different folks' lands currently. So wherever you are, we highly encourage folks to figure out whose land you're currently on and find a way to pay respect and honor that land itself and the people who still are here, past and present. One way to learn more about the Duwamish tribe is to go to their website, duwamishtribe.org, and there's ways you can figure out about how to get involved, how to pay rent if that's something you're interested in doing, because we want to move beyond just making a land acknowledgement to actually taking action. If you're curious to learn whose land you're on, there is a website that I will provide in the chat box. That's nativeland.ca, and it's really cool. You can look up and see sort of all of the overlapping tribes and land that you sit on currently. So we're going to do introductions. So folks are currently, I'll go ahead and call through folks so you can introduce yourselves. If you can provide your name, pronoun, and the organization that you work for or are calling on behalf of. I will start. I'm Allie Jerkovich, she, her pronouns. I work for King County Department of Community and Human Services, specifically on the Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services levy. And I'm the program manager for our investments around persons with disabilities and their caregivers. It's lovely to have you all. It's nice to see the names and some faces of folks I recognize here. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And I'm going to go ahead and just start from who's on top of my screen. Karen.
Oh, that would be me. I'm Karen Koenig, she, her pronouns. I am the executive director of Old Friends Club.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. Mia?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, this is Mia from Korean Women's Association, Social Service Director, and then I am she and her. Is it correct? Pronouns.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
It's not really familiar with my culture.
That's great. I'm glad you're here with us. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca?
Hi, I'm Rebecca Taylor, and my business is called Pros Arts. I'm an independent grant writer, grant strategist, and do some nonprofit management consulting.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. Nora?
Hi, I'm Nora Andermeyer, she, hers pronouns. I'm the Senior Program Manager at Lifelong for our Aging and Disability Services Department.
Welcome, Nora. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Scott?
Hi, everyone. Scott Brown. I'm the Director of Information and Family Support at the ARC of King County, he, him pronouns.
Thanks, Scott. Stacy?
Hi, everybody. I'm Stacey Sage, she, her pronouns. I'm the development lead at Open Doors for Multicultural Families.
Great. Thanks, Stacy. And Tatsuko?
Good morning. I'm Tatsuko Gohala with the King County Developmental Disabilities and Early Childhood Supports Division, and I'm really excited to learn more about this and to be with you all this morning.
Thanks, Tatsuko. Happy to have you. And then I'm going to go ahead and have my colleague on the levy team, Adam, introduce himself as well.
This is Adam Schmid. I work with Allie as a community liaison for the Adult Services Division, Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy. And I'll be helping with the recording and tech stuff in the background.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, so I went ahead and disabled folks talking just for now while we get through some of these slides. A bit of the agenda for today. So we are going to be talking about what the Veteran Senior Human Services Levy is briefly. We're about 2 years into the procurement process, so I think most folks are pretty familiar, but we will provide some context about who we are. Then we're going to be talking about the caregiver respite strategy itself that's listed in the levy's implementation plan. We're going to be talking about the caregiver respite for caregivers of persons with disabilities RFP itself. We'll be talking a bit about the technical assistance and capacity building that's available for folks even applying. And we will also be talking similarly about Zoom grants and how to apply. And then we'll have time, which is the most important portion, for question and answer. So during the procurement process, we're unable to answer questions directly from folks. And so what we do is we provide this as an opportunity for us to explain some of our thinking about the RFP itself, and then also provide a space for folks to ask questions openly. If we don't have an answer to your question today, we will be providing an FAQ that's listed of all the questions that are asked today with answers from our team. So we want to be thoughtful about our response. So if I don't know the answer, I will be providing it. And all of that information will be available on the Zoom Grants platform, and we will be updating it regularly. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So what is the Veteran Senior Human Services Levy? It is a property tax levy that was passed by King County voters in 2017. It's a 6-year property tax levy. The implementation plan itself, which is the document and guiding plan for all of us throughout all of the strategies in the levy, was passed in 2018, and it is what we've been working off of since. It covers 3 priority populations: the vulnerable populations team, which we are now called Resilient Communities team, the veterans team, and the older adults and healthy aging. And there's something unique about those 2 populations in that veterans is for service members and their families, and older adults and healthy aging team is for folks who are 55 and older and their caregivers. And then there are 5 result areas: housing stability, financial assistance, social engagement, healthy living, and service system access and improvement. And this one falls under the social engagement strategy, which is the marker SE. So the guiding principles of the levy, as you can see, there are 3 cogs on here. There's a combined arms approach, which means making sure that we are actually supporting the community as a whole. And what that means is that when we're thinking too about the investments that we're providing to people, that we want to make sure that we are reaching across King County and making sure that we're having the best network of providers possible so that people get the supports they need and can look out for folks through their various needs. And then connecting providers themselves and fostering belonging for the customers that we serve and folks who are clients of the programs that we're funding. So the guiding principles are connection, belonging, and then this North Star for our team, which is what can only VSHSL do. So this is something we constantly come back to as a team when thinking about how to make investments, where we need to be prioritizing funds, both on a population level, a geographic level, and then thinking about funding needs. So how can we fill in gaps in funding that might not be as flexible? How can we support our colleagues like Tatsuko's team, for example, in the developmental disabilities early childhood supports to supplement funding that might not be available through their opportunities? And so how can we use this funding in a way that promotes as much flexibility and fills as many gaps as possible, knowing too that it is still limited, but really trying to think that because we have this high level of flexibility, what can this funding do that other funding cannot? And the central goal of any of the work that we are doing at King County is around equity and social justice, particularly prioritizing racial justice. And you will see that in all of the investments that we make, asking questions around cultural and linguistic supports, particularly, and sometimes thinking about priority populations. And the overarching goal is to ensure that all people, regardless of who they are and where they live, have the opportunity to thrive with full and equal access to opportunities, power, and resources. So now we're going to talk about what the actual implementation plan says. So the strategy for SC2B And the guidance offered is that family caregivers for older adults, veterans, and persons with disabilities provide the bulk of support for persons with disabilities who need care. This program is intended to fund an entity or entities to provide subsidized respite care or to develop, enhance, and expand existing programs that provide respite. And that short-term respite subsidization can support community members to maintain personal health and sustain their essential role for the loved ones for whom they provide care. So that is pulled directly from the implementation plan. So one of the things we do want to note, though, is that we've gotten some really phenomenal feedback from the community about some of the language that's used in the implementation plan and language that we use. So a couple things I want to note up front is that the relationships we've heard are supportive and mutually beneficial. And we want to make sure that when we talk about respite, that we understand that it can have negative impacts on the individual receiving care and can promote an assumption that persons with disabilities themselves are a burden. And so we want to be really mindful about the language that we're using and make it clear that this is language from the plan that we're using, but that we understand these core concepts that the community has been providing us context for. And similarly, caregiver is not a term that resonates with all communities. And so what does caregiver mean to the folks that you are serving is important to us. So the outcome, we're going to start talking specifically about what's written into the request for proposal, which you can access all of the materials on the Zoom Grants platform. If you're curious about any of the investments that we currently have open, the Veteran Seniors Human Services Levy, VSHSL funding page, has them all listed. And so you can find links to any open investment that's there. So the RFP itself is loaded onto Zoom Grants, and so you'll be able to view it there. So I'm not going to read the full RFP to you, but I'm going to pull out some highlights from the RFP. So that's what we're going to be talking about next. So the outcome of the RFP is really to reduce the stress of unpaid caregivers, which will in turn bolster the strength of the supportive relationships and improve the quality of life for the whole family or whole unit. So we're supporting everyone to remain stable and comfortable long-term. And when we say unpaid caregivers, it is important to note that we mean folks who are not paid caregivers, but essentially you can receive government supports. We know that they are limited, and that does not connote that you are a paid caregiver. So overview of the RFP. The RFP is designed to allow applicants to identify opportunities for where respite is needed and encourages creative and broad solutions. So you'll note that in the RFP, we're more silent on things that the RFP can do. And the intent is to make sure that providers are able to let us know what actually is going to be supportive to the folks that you serve. So successful proposals will promote flexibility. And funded programming will also address the root causes of inequitable access to resources and information, and will center and amplify the experiences of marginalized communities. So the background section is broken up into a couple different sections, and so I just want to quickly highlight them here. The lack of access to traditional respite support. So when we are saying traditional respite supports in the RFP, what we're talking about are traditional respite programming or subsidized programming that's available through DDA, through the Children's Administration, through older adult services, and that is a resource that is available and it can be funded under this RFP, but that we recognize that folks don't have access to those supports themselves. And so we want to highlight that, and we talk about that in the background. Similarly, we want to make sure that we're having culturally and linguistically relevant supports. So if there are folks who for respite, one of the pieces of feedback we got from a provider when we were doing some initial community planning about a year ago was that the sort of supports that someone might need or the sort of respite would be something more akin to acupuncture. And that something we might be able to promote flexibility around, is that to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the community and that they're culturally relevant supports. Similarly, not using the term caregiver, if that's the language that does not resonate with the community you are serving, that we also want to be mindful of that. Mental health supports is a big thing that we have heard about from folks, that it's not just respite hours, it's actually the supports that folks need, including individuals with disabilities, the individual receiving care and person providing care, that need mental health supports to make sure that they can maintain and sustain that care, and that actually in turn is going to promote the health and well-being rather than what we might see as respite or paid respite or subsidized respite where someone might be removed from the house or leave the home for a time, that perhaps respite actually means something more holistic. And then we also got a ton of really thoughtful feedback about the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that supports for technology as well as assistive tech and adaptive devices can be an important way for folks to remain connected to the community. And that in fact, in order to access some respite supports, you need certain technology through DDA, Developmental Disabilities Administration. And so we want to make sure that that is also something that is available through this RFP, is that as we continue to experience the changes in the way that we are all operating on the day-to-day, that folks have access to those things as well. And then flexibility, which I know I've said many times, but we really want to make sure that that part is key, that we want to promote enough flexibility for providers in the community to tell us what it is that respite looks like and what you will need. And so that's a bit about the background, and the background will help provide context for the scope of work. And so we recommend that folks make sure to read through that section. So the scope of work, briefly, there are more details in the RFP itself, but again, we remained silent on a few things, again, to promote flexibility. So the scope of work, successful applicants will provide programming to support respite with by addressing one or more of the following. So you can either do A or you can do A and B. A is to provide or subsidize traditional respite supports. So similarly to as we were discussing before about what we mean when we say that. And as far as the type of respite supports, the time, the eligibility requirements, we actually are being silent on those. And so we don't have any stipulations that might be more akin to traditional support. So the type, time, and eligibility requirements, we will be leaving up to the provider to let us know. Again, encouraging folks to provide more flexibility than might be able to be supported through other funding streams. And then non-traditional respite programming. So that can be things like mental health programming, technology supports, programming for persons with disabilities themselves, tandem programming, so programming for both parties, among others. And then there's a section called innovative programming, which is your space to tell us, actually, none of what you wrote, Allie, is helpful or reflective of our community, and this is what would be. And so we want to make sure that we have space to hear that as well. So the funding, there's up to $610,000 available for the program period of January 1st, 2021 until December 31st, 2023. Apologies, that's a typo. And eligibility, eligible applicants must have the ability to meet the following qualifications. So to currently serve or meaningfully engage with persons with disabilities and their caregivers in King County, or have a clear plan to build capacity to provide the eligible services outlined. And then currently provide or have a willingness to provide culturally specific supports or meaningfully partner with culturally specific providers or equivalent community-based entities. And we do want to be mindful that when we are talking about partnering with folks, we mean true partnership. So want to make sure that both parties are aware of that partnership, that it is robust, that it is built on mutual respect. And so not to push the responsibility around cultural and linguistic supports onto another agency, but to make sure that it's something that your agency is committed to, and being in relationship with other providers who are doing similar work is a great way to show that as well. So there are evaluation requirements that will come through your contract if you are an awarded entity, and you are not required to submit a detailed, fully developed evaluation plan in this. That's something that will be done in partnership with our performance measurement and evaluation team, PME. But we are asking that folks think about what success might look like for the program you are proposing. And what the data collection and reporting will look like for awarded entities is we will be doing client level data through a reporting engine that, again, our PME team will help folks navigate and learn, and aggregate and narrative reporting. Here's the timeline. So the RFP was released on October 12th. Today is October 23rd. The final day for small agencies to initiate requests for technical assistance is November 9th, and we will be talking about what that looks like. The final day to submit questions to me, either to my email address or through the Zoom Grants portal, is November 16th. The RFP responses are due on November 23rd. They are going to be reviewed and rated during the month of November and December, and hopefully we will be acknowledging award decisions in December with the plan to have the contract start date for January 1st, 2021. So again, submitted proposals will include these following things. You'll see all of these in the Zoom Grants platform. So summary questions, narrative questions, and then a complete budget. And again, proposals will be due on Monday, November 23rd by 11:59 p.m. We encourage folks not to submit at 11:59 p.m. because Zoom Grants can have its own technical challenges. I think as we're all home, we're realizing that technical challenges are more and more of our world. And so we want to be mindful of folks that might be an issue, and so to not wait until the final moment. Rating criteria, you can also see this more fully fleshed out in the RFP itself. These are responses to the narrative questions that are provided. So organizational background and experience, the program model, equity and social justice. We do want to be mindful that while there is a specific section for this, this is something that should be embedded in the RFP throughout and is something that we expect to be a part of folks' program models and not just the answer to 2 of our questions. Budget and fiscal, and data collection and evaluation. And again, you're not required to have a fully fledged evaluation plan, but we do want to hear about how you would intend to define success for the program and what tools you might be using. So technical assistance. There is free application support available to small organizations. And when we say a small organization, we mean one that is fewer than 20 FTE, not fewer than 20 people, fewer than 20 FTE. So you could have folks who are part-time, and if it adds up to 20 FTE, and less than $4 million operating budget in the prior fiscal year. So if you qualify under those 2 parameters, you will have access to free application support. And qualifying organizations should contact the technical assistance consultants directly by November 9th. They are listed on a document in the Zoom Grants platform that is called technical assistance, and they're not listed in any specific order. We encourage folks to reach out to whichever one speaks to them. It's an amazing group of folks who are able to help you formulate a budget, think through answers to questions, how best to talk about your program. They will not be writing the RFP for you, but they can be a really invaluable resource for folks who might not be used to navigating the government system. And they can also help learn how to use Zoom Grants. Zoom Grants. So all RFP materials are posted there. You can find all of them under the library tab. That is also where the link for today's recording will be, as well as any subsequent FAQs. So I will receive emails with questions, and then I will not be answering them in the email, but rather in an FAQ document that I will be loading up regularly onto Zoom Grants, and you'll be able to find those under the library tab. All applications must be filled out and submitted via Zoom Grants. And again, questions today and those submitted in writing will be posted. And then here is the link. You should have been provided it when you signed up for the bidders conference as well. And again, you can visit our levy page to find this information. So here is the levy page, kingcounty.gov/VSHSL-funding. And if you have any questions, you can send them directly to me. So now is the time for questions from folks. If folks have questions, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll make sure to unmute you. All right, it looks like we've got a couple coming in. So let's start with Stacy.
Hi, are you looking to fund like new things in particular, or like would, requesting funding for something that we've already started and are trying to continue be appropriate?
Great question, Stacy. Yes, it can be funding existing program models in addition to emerging program models. So anything that you're currently doing that you think would fall under this funding stream or something that you'd like to expand on is perfectly acceptable under this.
Great, thank you.
Mia? Looks like you have your hand raised. I don't know if that perhaps was your question as well. All right.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah. First question is $610,000 is for 3 years or 1 year?
It's for 3 years. It's for the full
3
life
years.
of the strategy. Yep.
The
2021
second-
to 2023.
Okay, along with that, another question is, are you going to award maximum 3 organizations like last year or not?
That's a great question. We actually don't have an idea about how many folks we intend to fund, although I will say that for folks who have been following the levy, we intend to fund fewer programs more robustly in general because we want to be mindful of the actual costs of doing this type of work. And so we don't intend to fund providers under what would presumably be one reasonable FTE. And so it's likely that we'll only be funding a handful of providers for this investment as well. But we actually won't know until we get the applications. But that has been the trend that our teams have been employing, is to make sure that providers are robustly funded so they can actually do the work that we're asking of them. A lot of us are social service professionals ourselves and know what that actually takes. And so we want to be mindful of the fact that we are asking a lot of providers, including reporting requirements, et cetera, and so want to fund appropriately. That was a bit of a roundabout answer, but did that answer your question?
Yes. Another question is, then budget should be 3 years budget, correct?
So we actually ask people, that's a great question. So yes, and we actually ask people to estimate a 1-year budget so that we can get a sort of general idea of what it might look like for you all.
Okay, thank you. 1 year.
Yeah. Rebecca?
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay. How are you thinking about COVID in terms of programming that may have looked one way pre-COVID, and now we're in this funny interim period, and then we're all, of course, hopefully planning for post-COVID era. How are you thinking about that issue?
It's a great question. So we are thinking about it how you all are thinking about it, in that we don't know what it's going to look like. And so we're actually hoping that providers, as we've been seeing our providers currently, particularly from this community, stepping up to do really innovative and thoughtful work to make sure that the community of folks with disabilities and their caregivers are receiving the supports they need, that continues. And so we actually don't have any mandate or idea about what that's going to look like. We won't be dictating that for folks. And that's part of why that language was written into the background section of the RFP, is that we know that the landscape has changed. And so the needs might have changed. And so a good example is we have folks who are doing programming for persons with disabilities and their caregivers around caregiver community building. And it looks a lot different than it had originally been planned to. And so we're just trying to maintain a high level of flexibility to make sure that providers and the community are getting what they need. So the answer is we are not dictating what that's going to look like. And we encourage folks to let us know what your thoughts are.
Great. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Actually, I do have one more question.
Sure.
Rebecca again. So are you ideally then you'd like a 1-year and a 3-year budget?
I believe that the budget template asks for a 1-year estimated budget. If there's additional details you'd like to provide, for example, if there's a first year ramp up costs. So if you intend to develop a program model in your first year and then use a different model in the following 2 years, that the budget template does allow for that. But probably easiest thing for folks is generally what we ask, which we tend to think is allowing for more flexibility, but I think also can stress people out a little bit, is that there's not as much guidance as you might like. Is the 1-year budget to just estimate and let us know what you think it might look like. This is not, if you are awarded, that necessarily the budget that will be used. That will be something that you will be developing once we have awarded the entities. And so it's your best idea of what you intend to spend the money on, again, with sections free to provide more details as appropriate or necessary for you.
Great, thank you.
Yep. So one question that I did get via email beforehand that I said I would address at today's conference, folks were wondering if eligibility is open to caregivers who are caring for children with disabilities and or chronic illness, and that the language implied that funds are intended to support caregivers supporting adults. and that the funding is actually open to caregivers of all kinds. And so we are not putting age limits or requirements on the age of the individual receiving care or the caregiver themselves. We are trying to be mindful of the fact, again, that this sort of combined arms approach, that there are investments for seniors who are providing care or having care provided to them. And so we are trying to be mindful about the types of supports that we continue to complement with one another. And so outside of that, there is no stipulation about the age of the individual receiving care. Any other questions? And again, folks are welcome to email me directly or submit questions via the Zoom Grants platform. If you email me directly, you will get a slightly less friendly email than you might normally receive that just says, due to open procurement policies, that I can't respond directly to your email, and that you can look for it in the Zoom Grants platform. And that is because we're following procurement guidelines. So if that is it, folks are welcome to, we're welcome to adjourn for the day. And again, reach out if you have any questions, and I look forward to receiving your applications.